And please, if I get in the way of or I'm blocking things, let me know. Okay, so my glasses are going to come on and off. I just was telling them this is a recent development in the past year, and I'm still getting used to reading glasses. So first of all, I just really want to thank everybody for having me today. I was so grateful to speak to you last, I guess it's 2 years ago now in October. So I'm very grateful to be invited back. And I also recognize some faces from the family caregiver session that we did in November for caregivers. And the material that we're presenting today is actually very congruent with what you would have learned in that family caregiver session. So it might be a bit of a review. And that is really intentional so that people who are providing care and professionally or formally as in a volunteer are getting the same information as our family caregivers so that we're all on the same page. So that being said, basically, the main purpose is to provide an overview of information that could be useful for you when you're working with people who are living with dementia and their caregivers in the community. It's really high level because we don't have the time to go, it would take like days to go into everything. But please feel free to ask questions. We're going to have opportunities for discussion and to work together for things, but put up your hand at any time. I am going to start by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today, and to recognize that as healthcare providers, advocates, and volunteers, we have a responsibility, but we also have a power to help create culturally safe environments for care for everyone. And we specifically would like to acknowledge that the Alzheimer Society of BC operates on the unceded traditional territories of Indigenous peoples around the province. And I support the West Kootenay region of BC, which is located on the traditional territories of the Ktunaxa, Sinixt, and Syilx peoples, who are the original caretakers and stewards of these beautiful lands and waters that we are so privileged to be able to call our home. The Alzheimer Society of BC has an ultimate vision of a world without dementia. But until that happens, we'll settle for a more dementia-friendly community. And what we mean by that is a community where people are acknowledged, welcomed, and included. And that includes being free from any sort of racism or systemic discrimination. I wanted to start with that. So you will notice on your, in front of you is our participant guidebook. So this is for you to keep. It goes into a lot more detail about some of the information that I'm providing. It will be a really handy reference for you moving forward to gain information about dementia itself and how to support others. There's also a handout about person-centered language, and we'll come to that later in the discussion. On the back, there are some other handouts or brochures that might be useful for you, so feel free to take what appeals to you. If you're looking for something specifically and it's not there, please see me. I have a huge box of materials I might have with me, or else I could arrange to send to your email to you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start at the very beginning about what exactly is dementia, just so that we're all coming from the same understanding of dementia. So we're going to look through some key facts about dementia. And the first fact is that there are many types of dementia. So the word dementia is what we call an umbrella term. So it's a word that is used to represent many different diseases that cause brain damage, and that brain damage results in the symptoms that we see as dementia. Another way to think about it is when we think of the word cancer. Somebody could have brain cancer, leukemia, thyroid cancer, many different types of cancers, but what they all have in common is that it is cancer and that it is also possible to have more than one form at once. And same with dementia. It's possible to have more than one of these diseases that cause dementia at once. The other thing, and that's when somebody has that, they would refer to their diagnosis as mixed dementia. So if you're talking with clients and they say mixed dementia, all it means is they have more than one of the diseases that are causing the symptoms. The other thing is that all of these dementias, what they all have in common is that they're causing destructive changes to the brain. And those destructive changes, depending on what part of the brain the damage is in, leads to those changes that we notice in behavior, in communication, sometimes in personality, and in their ability to make judgments. Now, because all of these diseases are different and they manifest in different parts of the brain, and we are all unique people, dementia is going to affect each person differently. We like to say if you've met one person living with dementia, you've met one person living with dementia. And so we're going to go over today some generalities, some common things that come into place, but please, I'd like you to keep in mind, not everyone is going to experience every single symptom. It's a very unique journey, and everybody that you meet might be different in one way or another, but there are going to be some basic themes. The other thing that I wanted to just highlight for that is, for example, when I say dementia, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is what symptom?
Memory.
Right. Memory loss. Now that is the key symptom for early Alzheimer's disease. However, it's not the first symptom that you would notice for Lewy body or frontotemporal dementia. So that's some of the differences between the illnesses. Now, eventually, as more and more of the brain gets damaged towards the late, middle, and end stages, they're going to all be very similar. But just to keep in mind different things to notice and to understand when you're caring for people. And like everything else in the world today, there's a lot of misinformation out there about dementia. So we're going to provide some clarity. But if you read something in the news or you're unsure, our website, anything that's posted on our website is vetted by our researchers and in collaboration with Alzheimer's Society of Canada, as well as Alzheimer's societies and organizations around the world. So it's a really good checkpoint to, and the other thing is if you don't see it, you can reach out to me. We do have researchers on our team that I can email and say, hey, I had this question about that. Now they're really busy, so it can sometimes take a while for me to get back to you with it, but they do create any information that they have, or they say, sorry, there's not research on this. The other thing is that dementia is not a normal part of aging. It is normal that most people, will experience a bit of memory loss as we age. That is normal, but dementia is caused by a disease. So it is not a normal part of aging. The other thing is, and this is, one thing, is dementia is progressive. And what do we mean by that? It will get worse over time. It is a journey, and there is no stopping that journey once it's started, despite what we hear or some things claim. There may be ways to slow the journey down, but it is progressive. It will get worse over time. And so we like to talk about it when we look at dementia in stages. We use a 3-stage model, early, middle, and late. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. But I just want to let you know there is a 7-stage model out there. It's primarily used for Alzheimer's disease. And I just want you to alert that because somebody might tell you, well, I'm at stage 6. And you might say, well, goodness, we only learned about 3. This must be a really bad case, right? So it's a different scale. So right here is just a more sequential way to illustrate how dementia is related to all these diseases. So we've got on the left of the slide a list of progressive degenerate diseases. And all of those diseases cause damage to the brain cells and to the neural pathways, which is the way the brain cells communicate. So if you imagine my palm is the brain cell and my fingers are the dendrites coming out to pass on messages from cell to cell, that's how they communicate. And all of these dementias in some way or another interfere with that process. And when that process is interfered with, the brain cells do not get the nutrients that they need to survive. So for those of you who like plants not getting enough water or the soil is not nutritious, what will happen? It will eventually shrivel up and die. And that's what happens to these brain cells.
Is there any way to, avoid or like not get it?
So this is There is nothing that will prevent it.
Oh, prevent,
But
thank you, yeah.
what we have is what we call risk modification, right? So things that we can do to decrease the likelihood that we will get it. And we have a workshop on things like that. It's called an introduction to brain health. But the easiest way to remember it is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And the Heart and Stroke Foundation has done such a wonderful job over, the past 20, 30 years that we all have a really good idea of what's good for our heart, whether we do it or not, but we know. So by thinking of those things, we can think of dementia. The other thing that is really important when it comes to dementia is hearing. Hearing loss is a big factor. So if somebody is having trouble hearing earlier on, get those hearing aids. There's no stigma about them. Actually, right now, I heard Apple has new AirPods that have the same functioning as high quality hearing aids, but for a less price. Not that I'm trying to promote anything, but I'm just saying that it's important to take care of your hearing. The other thing that is really, really important is socialization. And that's where things like this friendly visitor program are so important, because many people with the illness tell us that their world starts getting really, really small. So those are some things that are outside of the normal heart. And
Great, thank you.
I got a question too.
Yeah.
Is it more prevalent now than say 40, 50 years ago?
It is, but we don't know. For one thing, it wasn't as well known many years ago. I remember when I was young, there were some people, my dad lived in a really small town, and there were some people, and one was crazy old Mr. Jones, and and so older people that acted a little bit differently or were maybe eccentric or things like that. Now we know basically on some of those symptoms, they probably had some form of dementia, so we're more aware of it. The other thing is the stigma, although it is still there, is being reduced. So more people are talking about it now. More people are going to the doctor and saying, hey, I'm experiencing these problems. We don't know if there are other environmental considerations or things, to do with diet or anything like that. But right now, there's 85,000 people living in BC with dementia. And it is predicted to be 250,000 by 2050. And for every person that's affected, there's a whole family that's affected, right? So.
The one other thing in terms of health is dental health. There's a lot of research now about bacteria in the mouth that is getting to the brain and triggering dementia
Thank you
as
for
well.
bringing that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of older people can't manage their oral health.
Right,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about oral health a little bit too, about how it can influence behavior a little bit later. So thanks for bringing that up.
so wild.
So all of these diseases are going to cause this damage, and that damage is going to cause the symptoms that we see. But it's important to understand that the brain damage, the damage to the brain cells and neural pathways is going to look different for each of these types of dementia. And because of that, what we notice on the outside is going to look different for different types of dementia. So I thought we could look at how this process would work for a couple of the diseases here, just to have an idea. So Alzheimer's disease is probably the most well-known of the dementias. It's how our society got its name. Technically, we really should be the Dementia Society of BC, but Alzheimer's is the most well-known. It's also estimated to be the most common. So the current estimates are 60 to 80% of all cases of dementia are a form of Alzheimer's disease. The one thing that we're noticing lately is a lot of it is mixed too. So Alzheimer's with another type of disease. What Alzheimer's is it's damage in the brain cells caused by accumulation of a protein called beta amyloid. We don't know why this happens. So this is part of the problem with finding a cure. We don't know why. But basically, when we were thinking about these dendrites, the cells communicating, it clumps up. It gets sticky and it clumps together, and it kind of provides a roadblock. And so the cells can't communicate. Now, early on in the disease, there's lots of other healthy cells. So detour, right? Detours usually take longer, which is why often if we give people time, they can answer our questions or find the word that they're looking for. But as more and more of the brain gets diseased, we run out of options for detours. and we see more symptoms. The other protein involved with Alzheimer's is called tau. And it causes the symptom that you may have heard of, tangles. So sometimes when we talk about Alzheimer's, we talk about plaques and tangles. The plaque is that buildup of that amyloid beta, and the tau is a damage to the internal structure of the cell. We don't know exactly what it does, but the analogy that I've been given is if you imagine a train track running through the cell, so the information comes in, it goes all the way out, something causes those train tracks to just tangle and get all twisted. So it doesn't pass, the cell collapses. And so again, the same thing will happen. Now, Alzheimer's disease is mostly it mostly starts in a very predictable pattern, and it mostly will start at the back of our brain, a part called the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is like the short-term memory processing center of our brain. So this is the part of the brain. I like to kind of think about it. I watch a lot of Law and Order. For some reason, I find it soothing. You know, there's a court stenographer, right? And so if somebody wasn't at that trial and they wanted to find out what happened, they'd have to take the files that were written in by the stenographer. So when our brain's healthy, that person is doing an A+ job. They are on it. You can be confident that any file you get from them shows all the information. Now imagine that person's kind of slacking off a bit. Maybe they're not fully paying attention. Maybe they're taking extra breaks. So there's gaps in those transcripts. Or maybe they assign what one person said to somebody else. And so when you're going back to grab those files, it's not quite as clear, right? There's some gaps, there's some things you don't know because it's not in the transcript. And then imagine that person quits completely. And you go to grab the file and there's nothing in it. And that's sort of how when the damage starts with the hippocampus, if you think of it as that stenographer that's just getting worse and worse at their job. The thing is, they file those away in a different part of the brain. So the beginning, when the hippocampus is diseased, but the other parts of the brain aren't, we can go and we can grab those older memories, which is why a lot of times people will say to me, but they remember perfectly what happened when they were a child, but they can't remember what they did yesterday. That's why. Eventually, the whole brain will get diseased. And basically what happens is people almost go on a reverse timeline. Some people will say, and you might have experienced it with some of your clients, that the person might think that they're living back when they were a child, or they might think that their parents are still alive or something like that. That's their current reality. And we'll talk about that a bit more, but this is just a very basic version of why that's happening. So in most of the brain picture, actually in all of the brain pictures and diagrams that we're showing, we're using Alzheimer's disease as the example. But I will briefly talk about some of the other dementias now, just so you have like an idea of what they are. So how many people have heard of Lewy body dementia? Okay, good. It's interesting because even in the 2 years that I've been doing this, there's so much more awareness. So Lewy body dementia is also caused by proteins. And the proteins this time are called Lewy bodies, named after the scientist who discovered it. Again, we don't know why they build up. We actually don't even really know how they build up or what happens, but we know that they cause the brain cells to die. It's also very closely related to Parkinson's disease. So the way that the difference diagnosed is, if somebody has the physical symptoms that we associate with Parkinson's disease, the tremors generally is, a big one, and then a year or more later, they start experiencing cognitive changes, that would be called Parkinson's disease dementia. If the initial symptoms are cognitive, and then a year or more later, they start developing the tremors and the physical symptoms, that would be called Lewy body dementia. The big hallmark of Lewy body dementia is often visual disturbances, hallucinations, really vivid dreams. And their cognition can go in and out. Some days they can be really clear about things and other days they can't. Memory isn't the biggest symptom here, although eventually it will be. But these hallucinations and also a movement, like issues with gait, can be common with Lewy body. And then frontotemporal dementia, which is actually its own umbrella term. There's tons of different diseases underneath this one. And it is, again, changes in the brain due to protein buildups. But the thing is, it's got its name from where it is in the brain. So our frontal lobe and our temporal lobes. And because the damage is there, it's going to result in different symptoms of dementia initially. So the frontal lobe is where it's our executive functioning center of the brain. It controls our impulses. It tells us what's socially acceptable and what isn't. It tells us, maybe don't do that. It tells us how to plan, how to initiate activities, how to organize. So based on what I said, you can imagine some of the symptoms that start with frontotemporal. A lot of times there's really big disinhibition. So people become doing things that we might consider inappropriate. And it's really out of character. Really big personality changes and behavior changes. It's often associated, there's a specific type with overeating. So some of the caregivers that I talk to that have some caring for someone, they have to lock the fridge because the person will just eat and eat and eat. That lack of impulse control. And then the temporal part is due to the language centers in the brain. And so another feature in frontotemporal is what we call aphasia, which is the inability to form words and to speak. And that's because of damage to an area in the brain called Broca's area. And that's responsible for making speech. It's really important to understand that there's another area that's really closely related called Wernicke's area. And that's responsible for understanding what people are saying to us. Just because someone has damage to the area that lets them speak does not mean that there's damage to the other area. So just because somebody can't speak doesn't mean they can't understand what you're saying. And this can be a challenge and can actually initiate some of these responsive behaviors that we see, because you can imagine if I'm talking about you like you're not there in front of you, and you can't communicate back, you're going to try to communicate another way, right? By using your behavior eventually. So be very mindful to not speak about someone living with dementia as if they're not there in the room. Try to include them in the conversations and be respectful. And then there are other rarer forms of dementia. There's over 100 diseases that cause it. I want to make a special talk about vascular dementia because it's the one that is not caused by protein changes to the brain. Vascular refers to our vascular system, blood vessels. And so as we know, there's blood vessels that bring oxygen and nutrients up to our brain. When those are blocked or occluded due to high cholesterol rate, blocking making the veins, what is it? I forget the name, arteriosclerosis. Atherosclerosis. Thank you very much. So it's going to occlude some of the blood flow, and so some parts of the brain might not be getting enough oxygen. What can happen is, has anybody heard of a TIA?
Mm-hmm.
Basically a mini stroke, right? And so that's a part of the brain that's not getting enough oxygen, the brain cells die. Or also could lead to a massive stroke. When my father was diagnosed and he went for his MRI, they found 18 TIAs that had happened, and we didn't know about any of them.
Wow.
So the thing with vascular dementia is that there can be a sudden onset of symptoms then, especially if they've had a major stroke, or even some of these mini ones, depending what part of the brain they've affected. It is very variable. Because again, where is it happening? That's going to influence the combination of symptoms that you see. And whereas Alzheimer's is a slow, steady progression, vascular is more step-like. So as there's more and more mini strokes or and more parts of the brain are starved of oxygen, you're going to see a big drop. The other thing is that they can also have really good and bad days. So with vascular, it's really common to bounce back for a couple of days and people get their hopes up, and no, it's just few good days. So it's the least predictable form, but it is very, very common, probably because heart disease is very, very common, and it's the same risk factors. And so we're seeing a lot of vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease together. So this is just like, again, the biggest, quickest overview, just so you kind of have an idea about what people are talking about. I also wanted to say that sometimes you might run into clients that say, well, my doctor just said I have dementia
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't give a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And this is because dementia is a diagnosis of elimination. So somebody goes to the doctor with these experiences. First, they're going to do a lot of blood work and tests to make sure that there's not a nutrition deficiency or anything else physical that's causing it. And we're going to talk about one particular case that you should be aware of delirium in a little. And then to definitively diagnose Alzheimer's, you need to have a spinal tap, and we need to test cerebral spinal fluid. Official diagnosis of what's happening in the brain can only be done after autopsy. So it is a best guess. Now, you are always entitled to say, hey, I want further testing. I want to know exactly what type I have. You're entitled to do that. Some doctors, depending on what stage you are in the illness, might say, you know what, no matter, because you're already here, nothing, it's not going to change. Like that, knowing the specific will not change the treatment. It will not change the outcome. It's not going to change the trajectory. So they might discourage it. And some people themselves just say, you know what, I know I have dementia. I don't want to go through any more tests. One of the reasons people might want to know earlier rather than later is some of the newer drugs out there that are for Alzheimer's disease specifically are only work in the early to middle stages. So they might want to know. But it is really common to get just a dementia diagnosis, and especially in these more rural regions where we don't have a lot of specialized clinics and things, people often don't get diagnosed till they're in middle stages.
And I guess my frustration with this is if the doctor or the nurse practitioner would get to know the person well enough and hear about the behaviors, they can probably make a pretty good educated guess. But if you've got a 10 or a 15-minute appointment, and the person themselves is reticent to know, it's frustrating because they don't get diagnosed. And it would be very helpful for the caregiver to know what to anticipate with behaviors. So
absolutely, it's just this cycle. One of the things that we have, and I left some with Suzanne here, is we have a dementia companion handbook, and it kind of goes through things to keep in mind when you're going to the initial doctor's appointment. So tells you to track behaviors and times and things, because often they are short appointments, and this way we can give the doctor. We also sometimes suggest people saying, I need to book a double appointment right now to come in. And again, it's not ideal. It's still, they're not getting to know them the way that they used to, when the home visits and having those relationships, but having everything structured and written out can be really helpful. We also online, we have getting a diagnosis toolkit. So you can just go to our website, type that in, and it's a printable package. It goes also through the 10 signs, it's 10 warning signs of dementia. And that is really helpful because when you go to the doctor, you can say, lots of times people say the doctor said, oh, it's just normal, it's normal aging or whatever. And you can say, well, hey, I heard from the Alzheimer's Society, these are 10 warning signs, and my person has this, and they experience this 3 times a week. And, you can get that evidence. It's a lot of work. It's so much work for the caregiver when they don't have a lot of energy, but that is there, just so you know. Thank you for bringing that up. It's really frustrating. And in the long run, it would save us time, money, effort, well-being, but. So we talked a little bit about stages.
Danielle, can I just ask a question about different types? So what's the type where people can get really angry? Is that common?
So this is actually one of the myths about dementia, is that everybody will get angry, or there's a specific type that people will get angry. We're going to talk a little bit more about what causes those types of behaviors.
Okay.
However, I can say that frontotemporal can have some of the biggest behavior variations. And again, that's that part of the brain that's controlling that's controlling how we respond to our emotions. And it's the one that's telling us what's appropriate behavior and what isn't. And so when that filter is turned off, all those things that we might be saying in our head when somebody cuts us off or something like that, that comes out with no filter. And the other thing is that in my experience, and I've got about 8 years of personal and professional experience, I have honestly seen more people that are go the opposite way, where people will say to me, they used to be such a miserable person and now they are lovely. So not everybody will experience it, but it is scary when it is, and it's important to let your caregivers know that if they do ever feel threatened or physically in danger, they need to remove themselves from the situation and call 911. And also on the 911 call, let them know the person has dementia. It's a mental health issue, so that hopefully they can send out a nurse and a medical professional as well, so that we don't escalate the situation.
One thing I noticed is that there's a lot of the dementia people out there when they're walking shuffle.
Yes, we're going to talk about that.
Okay, sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm glad to hear that. What I plan to talk about is what you want to know. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Danielle,
Yeah.
can I just share?
Yes,
something
please.
for you regarding, my daughter's father-in-law diagnosed with that. Being very aggressive, violent behavior. Prevented. Very quick progression. His hallucination and delusions are that his wife, there are 3 women living in his house. There's his wife, but that's not really his wife. There's this woman that lives downstairs. And then at other times, his wife is present, even though they're all 3 are the same person. But he cannot differentiate between them.
I was wondering what.
And if you think there's 3 people, strangers living in your house, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very
And
good
they
point.
actually had the situation where she had to lock herself in the bathroom while on the phone with the doctor who called 911.
Wow.
So, and you know, it's unbelievable. Like this
It
person
is.
8 months ago was playing mahjong, you know?
And so for him, he's reacting to something that he believes is real, right? So it's a normal reaction in his mind,
Yeah.
right? But it's very scary. Thank you for sharing that story. So again, we're not going into stages. We have a whole session called Mapping the Journey, which is 2 hours of each session, each stage in general. But this is the early, middle, and late. And again, this is the damage is indicated by the blue, and this is based on a brain of Alzheimer's disease. The one thing to know is, first of all, the stages are general. There's not a hard and fast line. Now you're in middle, now you're in late. Some people will experience middle symptoms early, etc. So it's just a generality to kind of have an idea. The stages are fuzzy, and there's no, like you're going to be in early for 2 years, and now you're going to be in middle for this many. There's no timeline on it. It just kind of gives you an idea of how much damage has happened in the brain. And again, like we talked about people progress at different rates. So it can be really challenging. But one thing that can happen a lot is some families might say, you know, my mom had no problem brushing her teeth in the morning. And then we moved her to long-term care, and now she can't brush her teeth anymore. And so they associate that, oh, something must have happened in long-term care that she can't brush her teeth anymore. But we might want to keep in mind that her symptoms are progressing to the point that we can't care for her at home, right? So we have to put her into long-term care. So a couple of things could be happening here. It could progress to the point that that task is just too difficult now. Plus, that big change in environment can often lead to a more precipitous decline. So people, just even a move not from long-term care, just from house to house, can cause a really big decline. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're, you know, talking with clients that have moved. A lot of people do, they downsize, right? Or they move into assisted living or something like that. And that can trigger a more rapid progression. It won't go forever, but there could be, I should say, a significant decline in often areas, not everywhere.
You know, do we know if that decline is actually physical in the brain, or is it because they don't have the usual cues and help that they had in their previous place?
That's a really good question. And we think it's more the latter. They don't have that familiarity, that muscle memory, you know, that this is the cupboard I go to and all of this. So the brain is sort of, you know, those detours that it's created, now those detours aren't there anymore, and they can't make a new one because the brain is now too damaged to make a new
So
detour.
it's not that you've actually made the disease worse, it's just that you can't cope.
Yeah, and the disease is progressing. So it's that combination. The other thing is, again, here, like this is the Alzheimer's disease progression where it starts in the hippocampus and typically goes around. Remember, frontotemporal is going to start more in the front in the temporal lobes. So they're early on are going to have more of those judgment and behavior symptoms than somebody with Alzheimer's, and may not have the profound memory loss earlier on. So kind of all over the place. So again, just that. This just kind of, I want to remind you, if you met one person living with dementia, you met one person living with dementia, just because client A is presenting these symptoms in early stage and client B is presenting these symptoms that are more commonly associated with middle stage and early stage, you can't really expect. You kind of just have to observe and decide how you're going to respond based on what you observed. So we're just going to take a quick look about the brain here. On the left side is what's a healthy brain. On the right here, this is advanced Alzheimer's disease. So we're not talking about people in earlier middle stages. This would be like late stages. And so something that's immediately obvious to people, size, right? Called global atrophy, it's just shrunk because more and more of those brain cells have died. So we've got smaller brain mass.
And huge gaps.
Yes. Yeah, so you can see in the normal brain, we have tiny little small gaps, but as more and more brain cells die, those gaps get bigger. And so if we look at our detour thing, you can see there's just less and less options for the brain to try to make sense of things and to move forward. And we like to show this visual because dementia, particularly in early stages, is almost like an invisible illness. We can't see a disease in their brain, but we see that this person is acting strangely or aggressive or forgetting words or can't remember things. And we might assume, oh, they're being obstinate or they're being stubborn or they're not paying attention or they're lazy. But again, there's a disease going on in the brain. Now, in early stages, it won't look like that, but if you visualize that, you can see what's happening inside. And many caregivers have said that it's really helpful for them when they're experiencing some really challenging behavior or where somebody is asking them the same question 20 times in a row. They take a step back and they remember this picture. And it just allows them to realize that there's a brain disease going on. One of my colleagues says they're not giving you a hard time, they're having a hard time. And so that kind of just really helps us frame. So I mentioned delirium briefly before, and I just wanted to address it because sometimes you might experience symptoms that seem like dementia, but they are actually caused by delirium. So what delirium is, it's a medical emergency, and it's like very sudden onset of symptoms. So somebody's all of a sudden like very confused, or it's like they got dementia overnight or like in an hour. The other thing to know is that it can affect people who already have dementia, and in fact, when they have dementia, they're a higher risk for delirium. So again, this would be like progression really quickly. Now, the first thing that people think about in long-term care when somebody experiences this is urinary tract infection.
Right.
So it's really important if you start noticing that the person that you're normally visiting and all of a sudden they are behaving very bizarre, this is a medical emergency. We need to get them to the hospital so that they can be treated, whether it's a high fever that's causing it or the infection, because if it's treated, we can most likely reverse back to baseline. But if it's not, the longer it goes, the more damage that can occur. So the other thing that I wanted to say is that so delirium, the big thing to remember about delirium and dementia is dementia cannot be cured or treated, and we can't reverse the progression that we've seen in dementia. Delirium can be treated. When the underlying cause is treated, then we can reverse those symptoms that we see. Another really common thing is people who've gone under general anesthetic with dementia. They can come out in a state of delirium. Some people get better, some people stay at that advanced stage. So when people who have dementia, it's really important to discuss with the doctor the risks and benefits of surgery. And a lot of times people elect not to have the surgery because of this risk. Another thing that I would really like to briefly address is depression. When we talk about dementia in healthcare, we talk about the 3 Ds, dementia, delirium, and depression. Depression often coexists with dementia in many cases early on, and we can understand that. The thing is that, and a lot of the symptoms of depression can mimic some of the early symptoms of dementia: lack of concentration, lack of motivation, increased tiredness, and forgetfulness, right? Because you're not concentrating on things. But if we respond, there's many treatments out there for depression, whether it's medical or other therapeutic interventions like counseling. We can manage those symptoms and reverse those symptoms. So that's another thing that we want to rule out, especially early on, that it's not. And I actually spoke with a client. I did my initial intake call, and then 3 months later, I called back and he said, you know what? We did more testing. She's on an antidepressant. We found out it's depression. And he's like, and we're so happy because we can manage it, right? So it's really important. The other thing is, if a lot of people in early stages do benefit from antidepressants, because it can help minimize. Think about it, if the brain is diseased and it's having all these symptoms, and now we add depression on top, which increases brain fog and confusion and concentration, we can treat those things. We can minimize those symptoms so that they're kind of like a double whammy. So just be aware that depression can coexist and often does. As well, keep alert for signs in the caregiver as well, right? So in summary, what I want us to take away from this beginning part is that there's different brain changes. Those different brain changes cause different symptoms, which mean different progressions, and that we're all unique and everyone that we support is unique, so things are going to present in different ways. The other thing to know is that there's going to be shifting abilities, shifting interests, and shifting needs. If we keep that brain picture in the mind and we see the person, their brain is struggling to do day-to-day things. They don't have the ability to adapt tasks to their abilities or adapt activities to their changing interests and needs. We do. So when we learn about that, when we learn about how we can adapt our communication style, our approach, our activities, all of that can help a person living with dementia to live a more meaningful life. So I wanted to just ask if anybody wanted to share some symptoms that they may have noticed in the people that they have visited or that they're experienced. I know we talked about shuffle, and hopefully we'll go back to this at the end, and hopefully we will have addressed most of them. And if there's something we can't, I'll follow up with Ali with the information. Does anyone else want to share?
Look for lots of post-it notes all over. And this.
Anyone else?
Something totally out of character.
Yeah.
Sometimes with post-it notes, they can read the notes, they can't understand the notes.
And
Caregivers don't always get that, and so they just put out more post-it notes.
And they don't know who wrote them either.
Yeah.
Who wrote this note?
Danielle, I don't know if this is gonna answer your question and put something up there, but so in working with a client recently, the home health nurse said, oh, they have dementia. And I said, oh, I had no idea, because she's been a client for the last year. And so anyway, I said to the volunteer, hey, can you just keep an eye on this and let me know what you're seeing? And she said, well, what do I need to keep an eye on? And I was like, ooh, good point. So for earlier stages, So I don't know if that's answering the question to put something up there, but I do want to know for early stages, what are we looking out for to make sure we're supporting well?
So
Yeah,
I am
thank
going
you.
to follow up with our 10 warning signs.
Okay,
We are going to address a lot of these changes here, but briefly, we talk about memory loss. Now, it's natural. What day of the week is it? What am I supposed to do today? Right? But really not knowing where you, like what time it is at all. Like, so I might be here and I might say, well, I just got here 2 minutes ago. You guys, well, you've been here for like over an hour talking, but I really believe that I just got here. So really, changes that are like not, that are really quite extreme in terms of time, or also maybe your visitor comes once a week, and the person comes to the door and says, "I haven't seen you in ages. Where have you been?" Right? Or, "Oh, you were just here yesterday." Like, so just a real. The other thing is disorientation to where they are. So just all of a sudden sitting here and being like, I have no idea where I am. So it's different than, sometimes you're driving and you find yourself on automatic pilot and you realize, oh my goodness, I'm driving to my old work or something like that. This is driving and being like, I have no idea where I am. I've never seen this before. One gentleman that I work with in early stages says that what happens for him sometimes is he doesn't know when he opens the door outside his house, he has no idea where it is. He knows where he is in his house, but when he opens the door, it's completely unfamiliar to him. Things like, we sometimes search for words, right? But this is like really not being able to get basic words and sometimes putting substitutions in for words that really don't make sense. Lots of times they're somehow related, like they might call a fork a spoon or a knife a fork, or they might say to the person, hey, can you go get me a spoon? And the person comes back with a spoon and then they're like, I told you I wanted a spoon, right? So those kind of things. Putting things in really strange places. Like, so always losing things and then thinking either somebody else took it or somebody else moved it, or, you open the fridge and the remote control's in there. So just those kind of things. Again, showing poor judgment in terms of, say they're going to go for a walk with their client and it's like winter and it's cold and they come in shorts and a t-shirt and they're ready to go outside. Right? So those kind of things, real lack of judgment. Trying to think of. Well, that memory, right? Like just, yeah, lots of post-it notes, lots of pauses in conversations, maybe not being able to follow conversations as well, repetitive questioning, repetitive storytelling.
Changes in speech pattern.
Yeah.
Big one. The big thing I was just going to add in terms of observing someone that's dementia is stress. Is stressed about their own situation. So sort of the stress that they can't remember, feeling of that they're losing control, and that's really distressing. The anxiety that sort of comes with it.
Somebody earlier on asked about pacing.
oh yeah, the pacing is nice. My dad did the moon thing. He had to watch the moon.
So, but then just a couple of things, some of the people are paranoid, they figure somebody's stole their toothbrush and they're accusing people. The other thing you notice too is, where people just stare on our space, but you think that they can't communicate, then you go talk to them and they'll answer you. And I just got that when you were saying.
Okay.
Reliving traumatic memories is
Oh.
so sad to see. So people that have been traumatized as children or abused in any way, it's like they relive those bad memories over and over again. And eventually they lose even those memories, which is, I guess, a saving grace. But having to go through a sexual trauma again or whatever in their mind is just horrendous for people.
Okay, so we got a lot of good examples here. And as we talk more about behavior, I believe we're going to get to most of these. But we'll come back after we've gone through that section and make sure that we've done that. So dementia and behavior. What do we know about dementia behavior? The one thing I want you to keep in mind is all behavior has a reason, a cause, and a meaning. So the cause may simply be there's physical changes in the brain and they are causing what we are seeing. But there's other things that you might notice. So one is they may not understand that they have the disease. It's called agnosignosia. It's a symptom, which means the brain is unaware that there's anything wrong with it. This is also a symptom that can happen in stroke victims where they believe, or people with amputated limbs, where they believe that it's still there, or people who have lost the use of one side continue to try to use it and think that they can. There's just a part of the brain that doesn't acknowledge that there's anything wrong. Not to be confused with denial, which is a normal human reaction to receiving bad news. This is just a complete unawareness that there's anything wrong, and they may never, it's not like denial where some people will be able to work through it and accept it. So that's one symptom you might notice. The other thing when we talk about these changes in mood shifts and things, there's a part of our brain called the limbic system, and it manages emotions. It's basically what we call our emotional brain. Heard of people saying, get out of the emotional brain, get to the rational brain. So when there are these changes in the emotional brain, we can't respond to our emotions as well, or we're generating emotions that maybe aren't really correct for the situation because it's not functioning properly. So we can see increased suspiciousness, irritability, anxiety. Changes to that frontal lobe, right? So that's where we're looking at our decision-making, our capacity, our ability to plan, to organize, to follow things in a sequential order. So things that have more than one or two steps start becoming really challenging. One thing is apathy. So the part of the brain that tells us to initiate activity is affected in the frontal lobe. So a lot of people say, the person I'm caring for is content to just sit there and stare into space. They don't want to do anything. Well, they might want to, but that part of the brain that says, hey, I want to do something isn't activated, so they don't know how to. So this is, especially in earlier stages, often a suggestion. Hey, would you like to go for a walk with me? Can help. They just need somebody, or starting an activity for them, or starting an activity with them. Asking for help is also a really great motivator. Hey, can you help me color? Or hey, I'd really rather, I'm coloring this thing and it's more fun with someone else. Can you color with me? So they need someone else to, oh goodness, sorry. Oh, this is on an automatic timer here. I'm really sorry about that. So that's something that's quite important to understand. The other thing is they also might want to stop doing activities that they previously enjoyed doing. A couple of reasons. They could be simply too hard for them. We know how frustrated we get if we're set with a task that we cannot do, that is beyond our capabilities. And so something that they used to be able to do, they may not be able to anymore. So they just don't want to do it. It's too hard. Attention span, right? So there's going to be a reduced attention span. So longer activities, they're not going to be able to concentrate on. So we might need to modify that.
That's a good point around longer activities. It's like something that's been coming up lately is to provide caregivers a bit of a break. There's the Bridges program, and the Bridges program is a full day experience. And some people are starting to say, like, I don't think they're going to be a candidate, or I don't want them to go, or it's just too long for them. So a good resource that we have in the community, but at the same time challenging for people living with dementia.
It can be. One of the things in those programs is they do a variety of activities. So they're not all doing the same thing. So, sometimes we're going to start off, we're going to have some food, which is a really popular thing. I don't know what it is about dementia and the sweet tooth, but my goodness, sweets seem to be just. So there's that, and then maybe there's some music for a little bit, and then there's some gentle exercise, and then there's a coloring activity, and then there's lunch, and then there's a sing-along. So the activities are broken down so they themselves aren't long,
Okay,
which can
great.
change. Now, eventually it may be too much, but sometimes sharing that with someone, like there's going to be a lot of variety that's happening, can hold people's interest.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and I'm just curious, because I don't know, do you have to go for the full day or can you go just to like lunch?
Good question. I just know bridges exist. I don't know the details of it. I thought you'd sign up for the whole thing.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, I'm going.
This is the transfer, right?
Yes, transportation.
Bring your, can bring
If you
your
can't,
son, yeah,
maybe you could, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you can do half day if you want, but
You
you have
can.
to have a ride.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Thank you. That is good to know.
Yeah. And sometimes it's the caregiver
Yeah,
that wants them there only for the half day or the whole day.
yeah.
Yeah. One of those things. But yeah,
Yeah.
Kathy, I think you work with the Bridges
I do,
program
yeah.
all the time.
Mhm.
And they do break up the activity.
They do, yeah.
So you're
Good.
putting someone assisting them into a chair if they want to have a sleep.
Yeah.
It's often the caregiver that's struggling.
One caregiver shared with me that it was like sending their child off to school.
Yeah.
You know, it was
for
just
sure.
really hard. And they thought it was harder for them than it was for the person.
Or they can't do it as well as I could do it.
Yes. Yes, which is a big barrier to asking for help. Another thing with damage in the frontal lobe, repetitive activity and an inability to stop something once it's started. And then again, we talked about that inappropriateness, right? So just inappropriate behavior, inappropriate comments, etc. So then when we have changes to our parietal and temporal lobes, those impact communication. We talked a little bit earlier about language in, language out, and to understand that there are two different areas and not everybody will have damage in both at the same time. The other thing, again, and Gail alluded to it, is not being able to understand what's written down or the written word anymore. So that loses meaning. And this is also sometimes an early warning sign too, I was just thinking of, was trouble with anything that's symbolic, like numbers, because numbers really, when we think about it, they're just a concept that we have. They don't really mean anything. So a lot of people will have to start having trouble with their online banking. They don't pay the bills on time, or they forget their passwords, or you have to show them a million times how to work the remote control. Anything that's sort of not really tangible and hands-on can be an early sign.
You can see where society is almost designed to be almost against those.
Yeah.
All of the password and all of the technology, it's pretty sober.
Remotes are ridiculous, like it's.
Well,
On, off, up, down,
It's
that's it.
interesting too, because right now the generation of people that are most, the highest risk is 65 and over, are the least familiar with technology. Right, so it will be, I think it'll be interesting to see as generations that grew up with technology, that might be in that muscle memory back. So I don't know.
Mhm.
That's nothing official.
Changing
Yeah,
everything.
Yeah, they do, right? And yeah, passwords, like seriously, how are we supposed to remember that?
But another early sign too, that suddenly this person always looked after the car. Put the gas in. Yeah.
Yep.
Remember how to use the machine.
Yes,
Very few gas stations are,
different.
yeah, most are self-serve. like,
Yeah.
Suddenly they just.
Really good
Follow
point.
those steps, that children early learning.
It can. And on that note too, people that can't use the microwave or the washing machine or the dryer and those kind of things. And that you have to tell them over and over, or they'll say, well, they changed it, it's new. And it's like, no, it's not. So those kind of things. And then there's our changes in our occipital lobe, which is at the back of the brain, and it's what interprets what we see. So separate from if our eyes are working properly, it interprets it. And there's a lot of changes that happen there. Depth perception, huge. Why a lot of times there's that shuffle. If there's things on the floor, we can't tell, is that a hole? Is that something I need to step over? Even now we can see there's different like speckles and lines on the floor. Some people can think that you will often see people in later stages trying to pick things off the floor that aren't there. It's that depth perception. It looks like there's something there that they need to get. Or clumsiness, sorry.
Puddles.
Puddles, yes.
Terrible.
Terrifying. And yeah, glare even can look like a puddle. So if there's shiny surface that's glared, it can look like water. Sometimes people seem to be clumsy because of that depth perception. So they knock something over or they'll sit something down right on the edge of the table. Another thing is when everything is the same color, it can be really confusing. One lady that I worked with was terrified to sit on the toilet. When you look at the bathroom, there's a white toilet, there's white walls, there's a white floor. It was like sitting into a void, right?
Same with the bathtub, trying to get
Yes.
somebody in a bathtub. It looks like a bottomless pit and there might be 2 inches of water, but they won't put a foot in.
It's scary,
Yeah.
right? So we have to be aware of that and we can use some things. Some people, for toilets, for example, some people use a different colored toilet seat on it. Or for men, sometimes people say, well, now they're peeing on the floor, or that, again, they can't see where they're supposed to aim. So some people will put like a colored tape underneath the seat so that there's something to aim for. So as much as we can, to use high contrasting colors if we want things to stand out. The other thing is also if we don't want something to stand out, like maybe the light switch, if they're turning it off and on all the time, maybe we make sure that it's the same color as the wall. Or we don't want them to see a certain door. Maybe that's painted the same color as the wall. So things that we can do that way.
There's a thing that they do at the lodge that if they don't want a dementia patient to go into a room, they'll put like it looks like a hole, like a black piece of
black
tape
net.
with something right in front, so
Yeah.
it looks like a hole, so they won't walk through the door.
Yeah.
Tricks.
The other thing to know is that their peripheral vision is going to change and their up and down vision. Where I'm going to do a little exercise. I've done this with, if I've done it with you in the past, sorry. And it's from an educator called Teepa Snow, who we're going to see some video of hers in a minute. But imagine that you have a scuba mask on. Put your hands up, indulge me. So if I'm coming up to you from here, you can't see me, right?
Nope.
I'm a voice coming out of nowhere. You might get really startled, right? So this would be similar. And again, this is just an idea, right? To earlier stages. Now I'd like you to make binoculars. That would be like middle stages. And then I want you to make a periscope. And that's like later stages. And that one is really interesting and something that I wish I had known when I was working in long-term care, because I couldn't figure out why everybody ate off everybody else's plates. Well, if you're sitting here and you're looking, that's where the food is. It's not right there, right? So understanding that can help you understand that they're not trying to be difficult. They're not trying to do things. They're doing the best they can with the way their senses are working. And it can help us modify. So maybe we get down, right? And we make sure we're getting that eye contact. We move slowly so that all of a sudden there's not somebody just standing right in front of them. Another thing with back to colors is some people say if people are dressed, say, all in black, it can look like a floating head. So it can be scary for people.
Oh, look at you.
So, and now it's just the way the brain is working, like it's not.
It's not the eyes, it's the brain that interprets
interpreting.
what our vision is.
And what did you call it? The
Occipital lobe.
occipital.
And then there's also the parietal region, and that region controls how we understand where we are in space. Which sounds kind of complex, but it's how I know that I'm standing here and that table's there. As that gets damaged, I might not notice that there's a table there or how far it is. So people might bump into walls or be more clumsy or have falls. And again, this leads to different gaits, right? Because they don't want to fall. So there's that shuffle, the dementia shuffle, right? The other thing is, and this goes to something that you mentioned earlier, is that they could be responding to a hallucination. Something that they see that we don't, but it's real to them. Or a delusion, which is something they believe that isn't true, but it's real to them. So these can all be symptoms that come because of those changes in the brain.
Hearing as well, Danielle?
Hearing, yes. So for hearing, what can happen is the brain can stop being able to filter out what it's supposed to pay attention to. So if we're here and we're all having side conversations and I'm trying to talk, Rick? Was it Rick? Okay, good. I'm like, my memory. So you and I are talking, but everybody else is talking as well. If I have dementia and my hearing's starting to go, I don't know to pay attention to you. It sounds like everybody's talking at once and it's overwhelming. So I might withdraw. Or I might say, I don't want to go out anymore. I don't want to go to a big gathering anymore. Now imagine we're in a restaurant and there's music playing and there's clanging of plates and things like that. That is overwhelming. It's like sensory overload. And so that's another reason why people may not want to do things or may want to withdraw. I did this workshop in Creston for caregivers, and somebody living with dementia ended up coming to the workshop. And when we talked about this, they put up their hand and they said, that is exactly what happens. She said, at first, I thought everybody was just being rude. Why was everybody talking all at once all the time? And she said, and I stopped and I told my friends, we can only get together in my house one-on-one. So. And then when we get to end of life, which you are all quite familiar with, there are some brain changes that happen just from dementia. So as the disease progresses, they stop accepting food or drink because they don't need it anymore. Their brain is just shutting down. Really increased sleepiness, and that's going to happen throughout the process. As the dementia progresses, the person will sleep more and more and more. We have to go back to our brain is working so hard to do the most basic things every day. Think about back when you were in school studying for an exam and you were sitting for hours and you were exhausted even though you were just sitting because your brain was working so hard. As the disease progresses, their brain is working harder and harder. They're going to need more and more sleep. And then that will accelerate towards the end. The other thing, a really big thing to notice is getting really hard to swallow. People pocketing food, so they don't know to swallow the food, so they looks like a chipmunk. There's food in their mouth, and those are signs that the end is coming near.
There's some interesting information just starting to come out about terminal lucidity. And so people that have had dementia, sometimes even for up to 20 years, all of a sudden at the very end, become very coherent and recognize people and are able to converse and that kind of thing. Now, I can't imagine how that turns the caregivers upside down.
Right.
I don't know how long that terminal lucidity lasts. It's probably very short term. But my goodness, this is not the person that you've been grieving for so long.
I just watched a movie on that. That was the exact thing. It was very interesting. I don't remember the name of it, but it was really interesting where the mom all of a sudden gets her memory back and then goes and sees her kids and how everything got turned upside down.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because it is just emerging and I've actually had questions about it. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know much about it yet because it is so new, right? So I can't provide any, but if our researchers have more information, I'm happy to send it forward. But thank you so much for bringing it up because this is something then that we can be aware of for our caregivers so that if they say that we can, say, yes, we know that that does happen. We don't know why, but, and comfort in that respect. Thank you.
Danielle, as I'm looking at page 9 under end of life, not that you have to go to it, but it says physical, emotional, and spiritual needs must be carefully considered. What does carefully considered mean? Like what's going on there?
It's basically, I think, a principle of all palliative care, if I'm correct, and you're the experts, but considering the whole person and all of the needs and understanding that just because somebody may not be able to communicate their emotions doesn't mean that they don't have emotions.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of the things that is really one of the last senses to go is that hearing. So those comforting words, that comforting touch, that presence, maybe you're just sitting there listening to music. When we were talking about the cuddle bed, when my dad was dying, I curled up around him in his skinny little bed and for the night just to be close to him. So that's what they're
Okay, thank you.
referring to, and you guys are the experts on that.
Yeah, I just was, what tripped me up was the carefully considered part. Is there's a different way for us to relate to someone dying from dementia versus other.
I think the big thing is that just because they're not able to communicate, to not assume that they're not feeling, to not assume that they don't welcome communication, to not assume that they're not there. You know, they're still there.
Yeah.
And so keeping that in mind in how we provide that care and that comfort.
Yeah, great.
And
Thank you.
one of my sisters died. Lots have died. I was reading her one of her favorite books. And I mean, she was completely up this month. That got to one portion and a tear started running down. And she died before later. But yeah, I firmly believe that right up until the end, they hear what we're saying, even though they can't respond.
No.
That's where they want to be, because they're not there.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right.
And actually, when I worked in long-term care, like people at the very late stages, I really noticed that they were, and it really changed my opinion about the experience. Just observing. So this actually kind of leads nicely into this quote. When we look at the person, rather than the disease, rather than a behavior to be managed, that can inform our care, and we can look at behavior as an opportunity to connect. One of the things that we say as a society is connect, don't correct. We want to be able to meet them where they're at. And this means considering who they are. What's their life history? What did they used to like to do? What do they enjoy? What makes them happy? What makes them sad? All of that knowledge will help you be a better caregiver for someone.
Is that quote in the book, Danielle?
I am not sure, to be quite honest.
I like this.
But I am sharing this slide deck, so
Oh,
you will
that's
see
right.
it. So Tom Kitwood was one of the very first people to incorporate person-centered care into dementia. And his work was actually formed some of the guiding principles of the Alzheimer's Society of Canada and the Provincial Federation in our approach. And so and I'm going to read these because these are his quotes. Rather than assuming that the person suffering from dementia has lost all sense of self, our treatment of them should be a constant search for their personhood within that dementia. There should be a commitment to understanding the person with dementia through communication with that individual and with appropriate informants. So this is taking the time to get to know them. This is why we suggest to families, and a lot of long-term care facilities have, those charts. What did I like? What did I not like? What did I used to do for a living? All of this. And it really goes back to what you just said, there's a person there, right? Their way of interacting with us has changed because of a disease. That doesn't mean that they're not a human being with needs and wants and feelings. And so more and more in our long-term care facilities, we're shifting from that medical model where we focus on the disease to person-centered care, recognizing that people with dementia are people. And I'll give a brief example. I was a care aide for a couple of years working with people with dementia, and my cousin was, but 10 or 15 years ago. And she told me how, everybody had to be up at 7 a.m. no matter what. And it was this schedule, right? We were task oriented. We were focused on getting that done. When I worked there, Mrs. Jones liked to sleep till 11. Mrs. Black liked to, was up at night. Now, as a home caregiver, that can be an issue, but in long-term care, we've got 24/7 staff. And if she sleeps during the day and walks during the night, that is okay, right? So if somebody doesn't want to get out of their clothing and wants to stay in their bathrobe, that's okay, right? So that was the big difference that we, in us talking, and more places are shifting to this. There is a new facility that was built on the island that is really focused on the kind of care that they've done in Denmark, the dementia village type of care. So hopefully more and more of those where it's like a little village and the people are workers and people have freedom to come and go as they like within a safe, controlled environment. So
There was a facility in the UK where this night shift staff wore bathrobes over their clothes. Or not bathrobes, like a nightgown and house coat. And it was just a cue for some of these people that were out. And you know, really, I've always supported the idea that people have day and night rehearsal. Yeah, we do have 24-hour staff. Often staff want the person
Yeah,
to come
right.
rather than adapt.
Right.
And I'm not saying that it's a negative, I think it's just getting ingrained. That's really why, you know, as long as they're not disturbing other people.
exactly, right? And that's where we have to, and it's something that we say to our caregivers when we talk about behavior. And there's a challenging behavior. The first thing we want to ask ourselves is this person a danger to themselves or others? The answer is no. And we move on to our second question. Is this impacting their dignity? The answer is no. Then we say, so what? Right? So, sorry, we might be going a little bit longer, but I think that's okay because we're having such good discussion. Is that
When you say a little bit longer, like longer than 11:30?
yeah, like maybe 10 minutes? Is that, or you know what, we can skip over.
Should probably put coins in your meter, because they are straight
Yeah,
there, so
that's-
just, we should probably all put coin in.
Actually, you know what, why don't we take a 5-minute break because I need to put a point in.
Yeah,
right
Me
now.
too.
Alright, good. Trail is so strict.
You have a hard stop.
I did. My toxic so I might just miss the end, but this is the next.
Okay, and the end is really, the last part is me just going over our programs and services, which you'll be able to find just by going on our website or grabbing any of that information. And so I'll see. Okay, I'm just gonna plug my meter and then we'll just take a quick trial break and be back here in 5 minutes. Does that
Yeah.
work for everyone?
Can you repeat, are they in danger of self or others? No, then what?
Doesn't impact their dignity.
Okay.
And so an example would be, sometimes someone might come out into the common area, not covered.
Okay.
And yeah, it would impact their dignity, right?
Okay, cool. Thank you.
How much do you need?
Yeah, I think so.
That's fine.
No, you don't.
Time for a pee. Do you need your meter plugged in? You do? Gail, do you need yours plugged?
Yeah.
Where's my wallet?
It's in the glove compartment, so I need to get my keys.
I know you talk about this and you think, oh no.
Right.
At that point, okay. Turns out I have a lot of negative energy. Yeah. Cross it.
Oh, no kidding. Our brains are fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I never really realized I had friends that had Alzheimer's and pretty bad and. got to deal with that. What they have.
Yeah. Trying to help.
Yeah.
These lifestyle, activities that keep your brain as functional as possible.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good.
Oh,
Lots.
there's a lot of it.
Must be horrible coming out here and seeing those.
With the rain. Everything went hard for.
Yeah, how are you? I feel like it's been so long since I've seen you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Are we good?
How about you?
Good. Yeah.
yeah, of course.
A nice little break. Oh my gosh. Good. Oh, good.
When I see.
I went to the Mountain movie and I was sitting beside Bailey. Yeah, yeah. So, we had a little chat about how things were going for her and, yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah, she, one of her friends is from Guatemala. And if I come back, I wanted to hear like where they were from and just different questions. And so a nice visit. She was heading down there. I think that's a great idea. I have never gone. I would like to start bringing some of those. She had, like there's usually.
Oh, they're good.
She said it's like.
Yeah.
I might look too.
Yeah.
Cause I was. That's what I think. Oh, okay. I don't know if I want to change all my.
All your stuff.
Yeah. And my kids are born still, so it's kind of like.
Yeah.
You know.
Still.
Yeah. You know what, this. I told you that. 3 days never midnight.
Now we have to herd the cats.
Yes.
When I was.
Are you a good herder?
Okay, we're gonna keep evening, everyone.
Talk about it tomorrow because it's huge.
Okay.
So much. And this. It is.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really excellent. Thank you.
It really is, Danielle. Holy smokes.
Well, thank you. I'm glad. And I want to thank you all for participating and having like discussions. So it's not just me talking. It makes it so much easier and better for me as a presenter. So thank you.
It was with dementia, you know, with the oral care and not being able to understand. One of the local dentists told my brother when he was my sister-in-law, she was a wife. And she was okay with that. She had to manage it, but at least it gave her good oral care.
That is good to know. The other thing is some dentists, if you tell them ahead of time that the person has dementia, they can adjust their approach, you know.
Yeah, there used to be, like Jen, I think she had a mobile clinic. And she'd go to facilities. And she was just so generous. She did it on their bed. Amazing. Wow. And she just had a personality that they would open and hold their mouth open.
So I just wanted to review here, and then we're gonna watch a video from Teepa Snow, the educator that I mentioned, just to kind of go over the concept of how we can modify and how we can be detectives and try to figure out what is his behavior trying to communicate to us. So again, we go back to all behavior has meaning, and it is a way to communicate information about needs and concerns. People living with dementia increasingly inform our education and our approach. And one of the things that they prefer instead of challenging behaviors or difficult behaviors is responsive behaviors, because they are responding to something. They're responding to either a need or a tone of voice or a way something is being presented. So what we need to do is we need to figure out, we need to be detectives. What are they responding to? What is the need that is either being unmet, or what need are they meeting with this activity? So we're going to watch this video where Teepa does a wonderful example of kind of talking through how we can consider evaluating behavior, and then there's an actual little scenario, and we'll have a quick discussion afterwards on that.
Just need to make sure that speaker didn't shut off.
challenging behaviors. That's how we see it. They're misbehaving. They have problem behaviors. We've got to do something about this. Now, I'm going to call a timeout right now because the biggest problem we have right here is you've already identified the source of the behavior. You're pretty sure it's them and what they're doing. Timeout. You need to take a step back and realize this is much more complicated than you think. And instead of being such a strong judge and jumping to conclusions, what I want you to do is back off and reframe this. I want you to realize that they're doing the very best they can to try to communicate with you, to meet a need, to express that they aren't liking what you're doing. And unfortunately, you simply see it as not getting your way. What you don't realize is that you started this very frequently in your effort to be helpful. Let me just say to you, you weren't as helpful as you thought you were. I didn't really enjoy the help you gave me. I didn't get it. So you have a choice right now. Are you going to continue to push your agenda to try to get where you want? Or can you take that step back and go, okay, well, this isn't working. Let me rethink. So what you want to do when you experience a behavior you're not liking, you need to, whoa, take that step back, take a deep breath, let it go, and realize now it's time to kick in the front of your brain and to become a really good detective. Try to figure out what might be driving what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, and what they're feeling. What maybe you're smelling and they're not picking up on, what they're tasting versus what you would be tasting. Because what you want to do is realize that you need to see it from their side. And once you see it from their side, you try to be in their shoes, figure this out. Suddenly, when you see things, hear things, experience things differently, and you make that choice, that decision to do that, the uh-oh becomes an aha, because you can start to realize it's the setting, it's the care, it's the gem. It's who they were before this all started. There's lots of pieces to the puzzle. Your job, if you want to do this well and do this over the course of this condition, is to stop the judgment, time yourself out, and reframe this behavior. Go from a challenging and frustrating, just don't understand why she's doing this, to pausing for yourself, getting some help, maybe getting somebody else to take a look with you, because maybe you just can't see it because of who you are and how it works. But what you're going to do is take that step back, look more broadly, and at that point, make a decision. What are they trying to do? Are they communicating an unmet physical need? There's basically 5 of them you want to learn about. Or an unmet emotional need. Or are you seeing the emotional need, but you're missing the physical need? Or was it something that is happening in the environment or happened earlier today? As I said, complicated. So you need some training. You need to know what's going on and what's not going on, so you can quit sitting in judgment and start using this. That's the best tool. That and your ability to bring people together to help you. So with challenging behaviors, it's not about them. It's about us and what we choose to do about this effort to communicate an unmet need and helping us figure out what is the need and how can we better meet it for success for both of us. Making a positive difference because we choose positive approach to the care. Now remember this lady? What do you think she's doing? You see her beating on the chairs, making noise, annoying people, and you know she needs to go to the bathroom. It's been a long time. You've tried to make her stop, but she won't. What if I told you she used to clean houses for a living? I'm going to try substitution and a positive approach rather than trying to make her quit. Miss Leona. Well, hey there. Get my hand out the way. You're trying to get him clean. Here, try this. She's a busy woman. I'm going to try a substitution here. Trade you. Not yet. Show her. Rub it with that. Can you rub it? Yeah. Here, rub it. Getting there. Trade me. Trade me. Here you go. Take this. All right, give it. You got it. Now trade out. There you go. Ta-da. Now rub it. Now I show her, and there she goes. There we go. People are less annoyed, not so much noise. And she's cleaning. Now I want to reinforce it. That's good. That's good. I still haven't met. You're doing a fantastic job. Her unmet need. One more substitution. Nicely done, Leona. She needs to get finished with this. Boy, you are good. So we can move on. You get this one? Watch me, I'm sneaky. That's it. Good, good. I visually eliminate the task. Whoa. Woo. That is beautiful. You did a fantastic job. Man, you're a good cleaner. Here. Thank you. All right, well, come with me and we'll sit down and take a break. Oh, God. I know you're ready for one, aren't you? Now, before she goes to sit down, though, we have a place to go. Oh, you worked hard. You are one of the hardest working women I've ever met. Well, Lord knows, let's go to the ladies before we sit down. Okay. Okay. We changed the challenge to success.
So, any thoughts about the example or about what Tifa was saying? This is where knowing what you know about the person and learning what they used to do, what they're interested in, what they like can be helpful so that we're not simply providing a distraction just randomly out of the blue. We're using our knowledge to provide a distraction or a substitution that makes sense to that person. Often people do have those unmet physical needs. Learn, what are the signs? And sometimes it is just time. Like, okay, it's been a couple hours since Leona went to the bathroom. She needs to go. But also recognizing that we can't just stop her from what she's doing. That behavior has a meaning to her. That is a task that she needs to do. And we need to respond to it. We need to validate it. And only then can we distract. And again, sometimes it involves a bit of deception, whether it's turning that chair or like you had said, putting a mat in front of something so they can't go any further. The other thing is this is where we want to share, right? So if Tifa's the only carry that knows how to do that and everybody else on the floor doesn't know this, it's not going to be very helpful. So as a team, we want to share with each other, this works with this person, this works. Did you know this about this person? It can be really helpful. Did anyone have any thoughts about her approach? Positive, negative?
It was a bit tricky when she was trying to get her to trade, because she ended up taking it from her and it worked out, but
it might not have.
It might not have, yeah.
I found her voice just a little bit pushy. Like,
I did too. I found her irritating.
And I wonder if it's just the accent and the style, like
a bit aggressive.
That culture, a different culture. Down south, it's a little more aggressive.
Maybe that works really good too.
And it might, and some people
the whole
do.
thing that I've taught from that is it's different from what I'd have done, but maybe it's what you need to do.
I will give an example. One of the carriers that I worked with, who was wonderful with my dad, was like that. She was like, "Hey, Frank, 1, 2, 3, 4, get up and do it." And Dad responded. That worked for him. He was on his mission, right? Whereas it might not have worked for the next person.
Yeah.
Another person shared with me that one of the gentlemen was that she cared for was a rig worker. A former rig worker, rough and tough and everything. And, "Oh, Mr. Jones, do you want to get up now?" And everything did not work with him. But, "Hey, get up. What are you doing?" Lazy bones and things like that. That worked. So this is where you use your knowledge.
Right.
And again, that's going to take some trial and error, right?
Well, it's interesting because I do a lot of work with kids with fetal alcohol syndrome, and a lot of it like Swiss cheese or brain, kind of like received dementia, and redirecting is huge, and also removing things like why was that? Did she have that noising to begin with? So removing things before so it doesn't become an issue is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Controlling the environment.
Yes, exactly.
So again, all of this, we wanted to have the takeaway is changing our view of behavior as something to be fixed to how can we use it as a way to communicate and to connect. And just that attitude shift will make a huge difference because people that maybe can't understand verbal language anymore do respond to nonverbal cues. So if we're annoyed and we're frustrated, we're going to show that in many different ways, our tone of voice, the way we're holding ourselves or everything. And then a lot of times people with dementia use those cues on how to respond. So, okay, we need to be agitated right now. A lot of caregivers share with me that they've had an argument with the person they're caring with and they can't remember, but they'll come into the room maybe an hour later and they're like, do I need to say sorry? Did I do something wrong? Because they can feel the change. So just that deep breath is a huge thing. Maybe we take 3 deep breaths. Maybe we go like, just even getting that fresh air now was nice, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we just do that. So I think I'm going to kind of skip through a little bit of this in the sense of time. But what we're looking at here, instead of going into all the detail for each of these, we'll just go through the main things and I'll share the deck so you can look at the different things. But basically, we want to consider what could be influencing the behavior. Remember, the first thing could simply be the change in the brain, right? That could be, it's just due to the changes in the brain. But when we want to find out what a need isn't being met, what are they trying to communicate? We want to think of physical factors. Okay? Things like, how much sleep do we get? Are we hungry? How many of you get hangry, right? So, are we on a new medication? Are they in pain? And this is where a high proportion of people have oral pain because of the poor oral hygiene. And so one of the ladies that I cared for was the most lovely lady. And then we noticed for like about a couple of months, she was aggressive, or we observed her being aggressive. We didn't know she was pinching and, hitting other residents. We didn't know what was wrong. Her husband took her to the dentist, had quite a bit of work to be done. A week after that, back to her calm behavior. So now we look and we're like, this person was in a lot of pain and couldn't communicate it. We want to look again at task-oriented. So again, go back to think about how well you're able to complete something if you know you can't do it or you know it's too hard for you. How frustrated you get. Or conversely, and this is in earlier stages, if somebody has made something really almost condescendingly simple, right? So it's that balance in observing and using what we know to help the person without infantilizing them. Again, communication, right? And let's remember that 97% of our communication is nonverbal. So this gives me hope when it comes to dealing with people with dementia, because that means we have a whole lot that we can work with when those verbal capabilities aren't there. But it really involves that work on our end. How are we communicating? Does our voice match what our words are? And how are we letting them know that they're safe and that they're okay? And we actually have a whole course on communication, quite a few. And we do have them on demand. So you can go to our website and type in on demand, and there's a list of workshops, and they tell you in brackets behind how long they are. So you can watch it at your leisure. And then we want to look at environmental factors, right? So this goes back to, are we in a noisy environment? Over the holidays, we talk to people a lot. If they have a huge family dinner and there's someone living with dementia, maybe we scale it back a little bit. Or maybe because they get tired later on in the day, maybe we have a lunch. So just looking at ways, maybe we don't have loud music in the background, right? We call it setting the stage. So just getting the person set up for success. And if they wear glasses, if they have hearing aids, let's get them set up. Now, hearing aids can be a challenge, especially with more advanced dementia. A lot of times they're taken out and put somewhere where they don't know. And, when you think about it, it makes sense. What's this in my ear? Oh, I'm going to take it out, right? Because they don't remember. But if they're wearing them, and they will, dentures, all of those things that can help set them up to communicate and to observe better. So basically, when we are going in to try to look at a behavior that we might see as challenging, but what we want to know is responsive, we want to consider these 4 factors, and we want to go through them step by step. Another thing that we do want to consider, though, is pain, right? So look, more than 1/2 of people living with dementia regularly experience pain. And that oral facial pain is relevant. Again, this is where normally for pain assessment, we rely on self-reporting, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much pain do you feel? This person can't, right? So this is where we have to use what we call a multidimensional assessment. So we want to look at nonverbal signs, pain or distress, they holding a specific part of their body. And we can even try to communicate, like point to that on our stomach and maybe make like a face. Sometimes some people have facial expression charts where they'll point, they have different facial expressions of pain and they'll point to them, and that can work. It can be to the point where that is too symbolic and they can't understand later on. But this behavior log becomes really important. When are these things occurring? What's happened directly before? Was it a certain food that they ate or something that, they have a stomach reaction to? What signals? Though another lady that I worked with, we learned that when she started lifting up her shirt, that was the signal she had to go to the bathroom. And we only learned that through trial and error and observation because people logged it. And again, this is where this family care partner input is crucial, and where you, as a friendly visitor, can share your observations with the family member as well. It's a two-way street, right? And you can say, this worked really well for me. Might not work for you, but like I say, it's another tool in that toolkit. So we can share with each other. Now, this is where I think we will skip. We were going to do a case study together, but we've had so much dialogue. I do have it, and I can hand it out. Maybe if you wanted to think about it or work on it another time, I do have it. But basically what we would do is we'd look at this scenario. It looks like she's a bit of a hoarder, has lots of food, but still losing weight. And when we tried to use logic and reasoning, that didn't work, surprise. So then we would say we would go through all of these different areas. So different things to consider in the environment, a whole bunch of different things. Again, physical, we want to look through all of those things. Are they dehydrated? Dehydration is a big thing. And again, this goes with that visual thing. Sometimes a clear glass like this doesn't look like anything. So maybe and again, water's healthier than juice, but what if we want to get some liquid in, maybe it's juice or maybe it's water with color flavoring or something, but let's give them those signals. Or even an opaque glass might not notice that there's something in it. Illness, hunger. Again, communication, like I said, we have a whole course because this is a really big thing. But one thing that I want to emphasize about communication is we're usually taught to ask open-ended questions, right? In our communication to get more of a response and get to know people. For someone with dementia, forget that because that is overwhelming. Think about how you feel, or how I feel anyway, when I go to the grocery store and try to pick out cereal. And it's like a whole aisle of every different kind. It is overwhelming. It's too much for me. So when we ask somebody, what would you like for lunch today? That becomes one of those hard, frustrating questions that they might not be able to answer. So we use what we know. We use what they like. Mrs. Jones, would you like tomato soup or chicken noodle soup today? Or would you like soup or a sandwich? We're giving them 2 options. We're setting them up for success. They can respond to that. Or as it progresses, that might be too much. So then we go to yes, no. And again, we use what we know. Would you like tomato soup today? Yes or no. Now, again, there will be a point where that might even be a challenge, right? But that we're talking about when we're communicating verbally. So that's something to really keep in mind. just simplify the choices, as well as simplifying steps. One step at a time, get that thing done, then move on to the next step. And this can be harder than we think because a lot of tasks that we do have a lot of steps and we don't even think about it. The example I always use is brushing your teeth. We get up in the morning, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth. And we might say to somebody, hey, go brush your teeth. Well, they have to know where to go. They have to know to go to the bathroom. They have to know where the toothbrush is, where the toothpaste is. They have to know they have to turn on the tap. They have to unscrew a cap. You're getting the picture. There are so many steps. We want to do one step at a time, or we want a cue. So that might mean if we want them to brush their teeth, we take them into the bathroom. There's a toothbrush and a toothpaste. And if even that's too much, maybe there's toothpaste on the toothbrush sitting there. But we don't want a whole bunch of other stuff around too, because again, that's clutter and it's overwhelming. Am I supposed to wash my hands? What am I supposed to do? We clear it out and we just put the one thing there for cues. Oh, somebody did this. So I'll just go over a couple of things about this case study, just some just so that we can understand kind of what we're getting at. So, we talked about how she had papers and mail and magazines and everything everywhere. She might not know what to do with all this stuff that's coming in. So again, we want to simplify. Could we get the mail redirected to someone else and they come and they give what is important? Or do we make a sign, mail goes here, something like that. And again, that's not only going to work for so long, then we're going to need to adapt again. But the other thing is we want to look at past experiences. I know Gail mentioned trauma. One of the things is we want to look at maybe that this person grew up at a time in the Great Depression where food was really scarce. And so maybe it's really important to them to have a lot of food and they don't want to take it out and eat it. So we have to meet them where they're at. And this is where we want to validate their feelings. Yeah, I know, I can understand why you might be scared of running out of food. There's a lot here right now, so you're going to be okay. Or we do something that we talked about in more detail, which is called therapeutic fibbing. And this is meeting them in their reality. If her mother here really believed that she's living in the war or something like that, we need to meet her where they're at. Great news, the war is over. Something like that. Anything to just change that reality. And some of us have, feelings like lying is bad. We're taught to always tell the truth. I think we really need to look at what is the intention behind what we're doing. Are we intending to deceive? Or are we intending to connect with that person and to validate their reality? Imagine how scary it would be to be like, right now, this is all really real to me, right? And for somebody to come and tell me that this is not real and this is not happening, gosh, that would be terrifying. And so meeting them where they're at, again, are they in danger to themselves or others? Is it impacting their dignity? So what? Let's join them in their reality because we have that ability. They do not have the ability to come into ours. Another thing that I really want to touch on is the caregivers and all of these emotions that are happening all at once for the caregiver and for the person who's living with dementia. And I'm sure you all know because you work with grief, that those 5 steps, stages that from Kubler-Ross, we experience those emotions, but they're not in an order. And they're not, oh, now I'm in acceptance, I'm done. Right? Some days you might be in acceptance, next day you might not. You might be in one thing, your spouse might be in another, one sibling might be somewhere. Oftentimes family dynamics cause a really big challenge because people are all at these different stages. The other thing about dementia grief is it's ambiguous, right? We don't know what's going to happen next. It's continual every day. Some people refer to it as death by 1,000 cuts, right? There's more and more loss. And it is also a disenfranchised grief Because a lot of us, when we talk about grieving, we assume that somebody passes away and we grieve them, then we move forward. Why are you grieving? He's right here. Right? And also there's stigma still about dementia. So some people might not even want to share with others what they're going through. So I know I don't need to spend too much time on this with you because you all know about grieving and supporting people throughout grief.
But I find, at least our caregivers, I find the ones who are taking care of dementia clients, they almost seem more stressed or more heavy than my other caregivers, because the other caregivers can often leave them for a chunk of time and go do their shopping or do this, whatever. But with dementia, it's 24/7, and then they often more so seem to get their nights and days mixed up than my other caregivers.
Yeah.
Clients. So the exhaustion with the dementia caregivers, but they're all tired, but they seem to be extremely tired.
Exactly. Now, some things that some people have shared that can work is, really working with lighting, like in the morning, like opening the curtains, and then when we want them to go to bed, shutting the curtains. You're like the cues that you mentioned in your pajamas, yourself getting into your pajamas, even if they're maybe not going to go to bed, quieter activities. You know how we had bedtime routines for children? A bedtime routine, actually, sleep hygiene experts say that we all should have a bedtime routine. So just kind of those kind of things, they won't always help, but they might. And you're right, that lack of sleep, that being on 24/7. And there's a couple more things that I wanted to address. One, especially with spouses, they're losing their partner. The person that they shared their joys, their troubles with, the person that they spent their life with, that they consulted with decisions, that person is gone, but yet they're still there. That's huge. And for adult children, they're becoming the parent of their parent. They're losing their parents. And that's really, really hard too. So there's all those other changes that come along with dementia. In addition, many people say friends and family pull away because they don't know how to react. They're scared. And so then, like I remember I was saying that their world gets smaller and more isolated. People are pulling away, they don't know what to do. Or the person doesn't want to share. Many people say that once they shared with others and were very specific about how the others could help, they were really happy to do it, but they just didn't know where to start. But that's so much work for the caregiver again, to have to do all of that.
I also think sometimes we forget the person living with dementia is also grieving.
Yes.
And they can't always express that, but that doesn't mean they're not feeling that grief.
Yeah.
They're frustrated because they used to be able to do this or whatever, and they know they're missing something or losing it or whatever.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. And this is where I'm going to just talk about a couple of resources that we have, especially for people living in earlier stages. There aren't any in-person support groups in the West Kootenays, but there are online support groups for people in early stages to talk about those feelings. We also have an online social program called Coffee and Chat for people. We meet once every 2 weeks for guided discussion, trivia, those kind of things. And they've formed some really great relationships and a lot of like, oh, I can't remember that, laughter and jokes and things like that. Also on our on-demand section, we have a huge amount of videos from our lived experience partners. And those are people that we are working with that have volunteered their time and to share their experience from all over BC. There's a gentleman that actually used to live in the West Kootenays that's now in Vancouver. That's one of them. There's topics, what I wish I would have known when I was first diagnosed, how to live well with dementia. Those are just some. If you have a chance, I would highly recommend watching them yourselves or suggesting them to people in earlier stages. One gentleman that I suggested it to said that I got diagnosed 6 months ago. And after I watched that panel discussion, that was the first time in 6 months I had any hope. Because he saw people living a good life, a meaningful life. And so thank you so much for bringing that up because it is really important.
There's another thing that happened with my brother-in-law, and that's where his wife did not want him to tell anybody. And he felt bound by that because he didn't want to let her down, and he held on way too long. She had early onset, so she went really quick. But still, that's something that needs to kind of be out there too.
Yes, we're working really hard on trying to reduce that stigma associated with dementia. And I really my hat's off to these lived experience partners who are willing to share their story. One gentleman wears a little lanyard that says, "I'm living with Alzheimer's disease," and he wears it everywhere he goes. And I talked to him about it, and he said, most people never ask me about it. He goes, but I see them looking. He goes, and I imagine that they're saying, look how well that man does. And he's living with Alzheimer's. So there, yeah. So this kind of leads into some of our services. We have the First Dementia Helpline. It's a helpline for caregivers, for people living with dementia, for volunteers, for healthcare workers. Call in. Either you could brainstorm a solution together. Maybe there's a challenging behavior you're finding challenging that you want to brainstorm and walk through the problem solving with. On the table over there's my business card. You're welcome to reach out to me at any time. And it also has the First Link Dementia Helpline numbers. We also have services in Mandarin, Cantonese, Hindu, Punjabi, and Urdu as well. Minds in Motion, it's an online fitness and social program. In the West Kootenays, it's only online right now. But again, it's an hour where the person and a care partner, and it doesn't have to be their caregiver. So it could be maybe something that you might do as a friendly visitor. First half hour, gentle exercises led by a certified fitness instructor. Second half is a guided discussion or games.
Is it a video or is it?
It's a live online.
Oh.
So sometimes the exercise portion is a video, but there's a host and there's a real person doing that. Support groups. We have online support groups. In Nelson and Trail, there are in-person support groups right now. We're looking at hopefully starting something in Castlegar and Cusp. Moving forward, need volunteers. That's always the challenges people know. But the online ones are great because we have specialized groups just for adult children, groups just for people caring from afar, groups just for people dealing with frontotemporal dementia. So we get that specialization. There's education. There's sessions for the public that can come and sign up that we do from time to time. We'll post about it or send you so that you know about it. That's the family caregiver session that some of you came to. There's also online workshops people can sign up for. The workshops are interactive, kind of like today where we had discussion. The webinars are more of a lecture format. Those are every Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 3:30 on a variety of topics. Today's is living with young onset dementia. Those are all recorded too, so you can go to our on-demand site and review those. And then we have bulletins, connections, and insider to publications that we send out. And then lastly, our First Link program. I have referral packages there for you. Anybody working in the community at a community agency can do a referral. What it is it's when we receive a referral, it tells us that you have had a conversation with your client and they're open to the Alzheimer's Society of BC contacting them. We reach out to them within 3 weeks and we discuss their situation and we talk about what programs or supports could help them based on where they are, and we follow them throughout the journey. So sometimes it's a several-year process, helping them at each stage. Some people will, go in and out of support groups depending on where they're at. We also do regular calls. So we check in every few months. And we do that because it takes the onus off of them. They don't have to reach out and phone us. We reach out to them. On average, somebody who is formally referred, rather than handing them a pamphlet and saying, you should call the Alzheimer's Society, gets in contact with us 11 months sooner than someone who would self-refer. And for dementia, 11 months can be a really long time in knowing what to expect and getting things in place. So those referral packages are there. Please take one if you're interested. And if you want more forms or anything, I do have them.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sorry that it got so rushed towards the end, but I think it's just because we had such a great discussion and interaction. So I thank you all so much. And if anybody has questions or wants a discussion, and I don't know what your time is like, but I'm happy to be here as long as you need.
Well, I think if you are willing and if people do have questions, we'll just leave it open to anyone to approach you if people want to stay. And thank you so much for all of this information. There's such a breadth in what you know and what you can share with us. So anything that supports us with our clients is great. We're grateful for. So thank you.
And you know, like we've worked together in the past. Reach out at any time if there's a different situation or something where maybe we have a brochure or maybe we have a workshop that might be beneficial. That's what I'm here for, is to try to create this community of care. And the Dementia Project with NavCare is just another way that more and more organizations are creating this community so that people can live in the community longer.
Yeah. Thank you.
Question about the website, because here it says alzheimer.ca, but there it says alzheimerbc.org. So all the resources that you've been referring to are at abc.org, are they?
No, I'm just gonna I'm gonna check. That's a really good. That's a really good.
Where to go?
That might just be for the first link.
I'm just gonna check on my phone here.
Wow.
Before everyone goes, I just want to highlight that we have Maggie, who's been doing the dementia project.
Yep.
And Maggie's always open for questions or interest in working within the project. Also, too, the majority of people in the room have received invitations via email to join the NavCare training. I know that some people don't like to register online, and so there is a paper form here. So I'll just pass those out, and there's instructions on how to submit them.
So I just checked, if you type in alzheimerbc.org, it will direct you to alzheimerbc.ca. So it will automatically take you there. So thank you. I need to update these slides. So
I want to thank you for 2 or 3 times now. And I've contacted Danielle by email over this question, and you always respond. So thank you.
Yeah, you are very open and generous with your knowledge and your time.
that means a lot. I finally found something I love to do. It took a long time, but I finally got there.
Yes.
Okay. So,